Okay, cool.
I might mention to my family that playing the drums won't work during my talk. I'll be right back because I have to play my video. I have to leave my sound on. So let me just mention that. I'll be right back.
Sure, no problem. Hi, everybody. You're welcome to turn your cameras on if you'd like. You don't have to. How are you? Hi. How's it going? Hello. Exciting presentation today. I'm gonna, for those of you who are new to this, I will wait until about 4:05 before we start. So you're welcome to have casual conversation with me, ask questions as we wait for everybody to show up, and just get it all going. I missed people in my focus session this morning. Chrissy, I see you there. I think everybody's gotten so busy they don't even have time to focus.
You need to give another time. I loved it. It was, yeah, I need another one.
I know. I'm gonna do for the second half of the semester. I'm gonna pick a different time so that everybody gets a chance. Yeah. I don't know where Jasmine is. She's supposed to help me here handle all the admits. I don't know why. Well, I do know why I did the waiting room just in case, but it's kind of a hassle.
Yeah. I have actually, and I shouldn't say this. I shouldn't say I've never been Zoom bombed because then that would happen.
Right. Well, I haven't either, but my son is in high school and they have, so yeah, I'm being careful, but that's a different scenario. I've not been Zoom bombed before either, but yeah, of course, sure, it's going to happen now. Well, I'm letting everybody in the waiting room anyway, so what's the point?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. So Krista, hadn't seen you in a while. Hope all's good.
You in chat.
Okay, cool. Got it. Oh, okay. All good. All right. And just for those of you who are in my class, if you log in with a strange name on your Zoom, I won't be able to recognize it for attendance. So either text me or change your name so I can make sure I know who you all are.
But for the 1 credit, we only have to attend 10 out of the 14 sessions, right?
That is true. Same with the other two. Yeah. I don't want our speaker to hear that people are like, we only have to come.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. No, but it's just, it's hard to keep track if like people have like question marks and all kinds of weird stuff for their login or their sign in or whatever. So, all right, we're getting definitely a critical mass here. We will wait till 10:05 and then I'm going to do a brief introduction to you, Amelia, but I'd love for you to say, let everybody know some of the really cool things that you've done. I'm going to say some stuff, but we'll wait till 4:05, 1:05 your time, and let everybody in. Oh, Pray, you look like, I love that you're outside. It makes me feel like maybe I'm outside too, and it feels good. I call this the moment of the great tethering. We're all tethered to our computer and it's awful.
I have to switch it up or I just go stir crazy.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. Yep. Well, we all know that you can run a Zoom meeting from a car now. Even if it's not a Prius. All right. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and let this last person in. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to the, I think, sixth speaker for the Inclusive Media Futures lecture series. Although I think lecture is not really the best word. It's, you know, presentation series, conversation. And just for those of you who haven't been here before, this series is part of a pro seminar at Georgia State University, and it's based on a book by Kamal Sinclair and Jessica Clark, which is based on an interview series that Kamal did through the Ford Foundation. And the book is called Making a New Reality, and I'll put the link in the chat because it is what we call copy left and free and available to anyone who would like to read it. Yeah, so some of the interviewees that Kamal had for the book are speakers for several of these presentations, and then mixed with, as you all have seen, some people from Atlanta, some students, some grad students, all kinds of people, but really this is meant to be a conversation. So the presentation today is going to be fairly short and with lots of room for questions, conversations, and I'll handle calling on you all, so you can either text me or raise your hand, but it's best if you raise your hand through the Zoom hand raising. And yeah, so welcome. So today we have Amelia Winger-Bearskin, and I have seen some of her work just by researching what she's done. Really avant-garde, really technical, really fascinating art and technology that she has created and that she continues to promote and create. And a couple of things that she's done, she's a Mozilla Fellow through the MIT documentary series or documentary lab. And several of our speakers have been that. So it's a really innovative, cutting edge sort of how to document and co-create with other people their stories and tell their stories. She's a huge advocate of art and technology and empowering people to use bleeding edge technology to create positive change, which is a lot of what we've talked about in this class, how to use technology for good. And that's where I'm going to stop and let Amelia take over. So go ahead, Amelia. The screen is yours, and you can, say a few more words and whatever you would like.
Well, it's so good to be here. Hello. I wish I was in Atlanta hanging out with all of you in person, and I wish I could meet all of you in person and hang out. You might hear some drums in the background. That's my husband and my son are playing around with the drum set, trying to move it, and that's the way our life is. Sometimes you might hear my dog. He might come into the picture. I'll introduce you to my 5-month-old puppy. So I am Seneca Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm Indigenous. And I'm going to play you a little video that I like to do for presentations, because I got really bored of just doing the slide deck, clicking through and speaking over with a little Zoom window. And so I hope you'll indulge me in trying this out. Let me know if you think it works or it's interesting. If not, I'm always learning and growing myself. So I'd love to get feedback and know how best to present myself and what's engaging and interesting to students. So thank you so much for playing with me and trying to make this medium more exciting, because I know we've all are a little zoomed out. So thank you very much for having me here, and I will share my screen with you. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Good. Great.
Hello, my name is Amelia Winger-Bearskin. Thank you so much for having me speak today. I would like to share with you some of my work. I am Seneca Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma, Deer Clan. That means I'm Indigenous on my mother's side. And we are part of the Iroquois, or as we like to call ourselves, the Haudenosaunee, which are the Six Nation people of the Longhouse. We're a Confederate democracy. I would love to share with you a little bit about my practice, both with a term that I've coined called antecedent technology and decentralized storytelling. Decentralized storytelling really comes from the way in which I grew up learning about my own oral history of my culture. My mom is a traditional storyteller for our tribe, which means that she gathered and collected the stories from the elders within our culture and shared them through performance at universities, festivals, museums, and also became someone who was a scholar and shared stories with other Indigenous people all around the world. When I was growing up, I would perform with her with flutes or drums or other type of our traditional instruments to, because our storytelling is actually multifaceted. It's why I call it decentralized, not just because it is decentralized within a multitude of different types of media, like visual media that might take the form of tattoos, or these same images may be on our pottery or our beading or on instruments in ceremony or objects within ceremonial traditions. It also, our storytelling is embedded in the landscape. It's connected to nature and to our animals. It's decentralized as a strategy to make it so that the wisdom that we have, the dependencies that are part of this architectural code of our community, to build a lasting peace and democracy, you need to abstract things in a way that you can communicate to future generations. We have a concept where anything that I'm doing now is the result of the 7 generations before me, and anything that I do will have a lasting impact on the 7 generations in front of me. But that also means that the information that I learn, something that I may add to this chain, needs to be clear, it needs to be abstracted, and it needs to also contain the multitudes of wisdom that I have learned without corrupting this information, right? So I think of it very much, since I am a technologist, I am a Mozilla Fellow embedded at MIT's co-creation studio with Kat Sizak. I'm also a developer evangelist for the startup Contentful. And my work as a technologist has helped me also understand the cultural value and contributions Indigenous people have, and be able to communicate it with other technologists as well. If you're going to take whatever you made in code this week, maybe let's say, and communicate that to someone 7 generations in the future, what would you need to include in that information? You might need to say what the thing you're doing is for, what its dependencies are. It might need something like a computer in order to run. You'd have to explain what a computer is to those people who maybe the technology may be so incredibly different in the future. But really, you would need to explain to them why these things mattered and how they're important and what types of values you hoped to engage with in order to make the world a better place. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the projects that I've been doing in virtual reality with software development and co-creation, and also the podcast that I created called Welcome.Codes, where I interview Indigenous technologists about all the really amazing things they're doing with their own communities. So thank you very much for having me today.
There is that really crazy sound effect when the giant's leg gets shaved. That's this really strange sponge that I bought. That's the worst sponge ever. Like, it's so bad at scrubbing dishes. And we sat there and we were listening to it and we're like, this is the sound of shaving a giant's leg. This is perfect. I started out kind of my creative career as a writer, and I was really interested in kind of experimental writing that leverage different aspects of new technologies. So I got to this point where I was like, it's really fun to think about technology and how it's impacting us, but I would really rather be working directly with the technologies. I went to a grad program called ITP and I learned how to code. In my last year of grad school, VR suddenly came onto the scene as like something that was going to be accessible for us to use.
You know, Sarah was the first person I had met as an artist who was just working in VR in a more playful way. We just started brainstorming and thinking of moments when you virtually give someone a piece of your life, like in daily life. If I'm talking to Sarah and I'm trying to explain to her how I felt that morning or what I was thinking about the future, very frequently we prototype those kinds of experiences with sayings or with metaphors. So I can say, like, I walked into that room and my stomach just dropped, or it was so like loud that I felt like my ears were bleeding.
Your Hands or Feet is a VR experience. It's an interactive exploration of new metaphors. The experience starts off where you're in kind of this surreal looking kitchen and you have in front of you a half dozen carton of eggs, and inside of each egg is contained an experience that has some kind of psychologically complex action to it that we hope acts as something that you think back on and you're like, wow, this is such a strange feeling. It kind of reminds me of, for instance, like that time that I felt like my hands were feet.
I don't know. I feel like my mind is a confusing machine.
What we're really doing here is we're creating these metaphors that like maybe don't exist, but might apply in a situation as like the perfect way to describe this thing.
In the beginning, I started with a basic treatment. So I created a lot of 3D assets to just sort of mock up this world, sort of the look and feel. And we came up with this idea of having it be like a half dozen experiences from, you know, a half egg carton and how we would move from each space.
Landing on the visuals for any project is an interesting process. You know, you have to make something that feels true to something that you like, but it also has to be something true to what the other person likes.
Sarah said she had this amazing friend, Neve Bavarsky in LA, who was an illustrator. We reached out to Neve and, you know, showed him all of the reference imagery, showed him our very tight color palette of what we were trying to go for. And we were like, can you do the Neve version of Your Hands or Feet universe?
And then from there, we were like, how are we going to put this thing together? Because translating from 2D into 3D seems easy, but to keep the same visual style is not always so straightforward. It made a lot of sense, like, for us to approach it with a style that's inviting and not like depressing or scary, but just a little bit scary maybe.
It's really helpful to like take those two concepts and then give it to one person that can execute that so that it stays really consistent.
So we were like, let's try this tool, Medium, which is a 3D VR sculpting tool. And so we felt like, oh, this is perfect that we found this way to find like a slice of what we were interested in, a way that we can produce it in a really organic and fun way. And that's kind of how we landed on the visual style that we're at right now.
A lot of our music is going to be generative. So generative music is when you're really designing those whys, therefores, and ifs.
You know, normally you listen to a song and it's got the beginning and the middle of the end and there's like nothing you can do about it. But in an interactive song, there's ways that you can alter parts of it so that way you're sort of participating with the music. Every object that you pick up is like contains an audio track. Depending on which objects you interact with, you're really flushing out what the soundscape of that environment is.
Me and Sarah are doing all this work to create a really fun playground. We might have kind of serious concepts about the emotional resonance behind each of the interactions, which we have very long and engaged conversations about. Like even the physicality of grabbing that object, that action has to be connected. So we want each of the interactions to also be analogous to a place and time that you might have had that feeling.
When I look at it from an outside perspective, I'm like, a lot of these things have to do with frustration, but a lot of them also have to do with joy and feeling joy while doing something frustrating.
And so I want to give people a moment where they can interact with that quality of VR, where they can say, this is an extension of my brain and my experience within the world. This isn't the real world. This is the computational amalgamation of human understanding in this world. And I want to give people an opportunity to interact with that and interface with that.
When we explain it to people, they just get it and they're excited about it, even though it's like, oh, it's like an experience where your hands are feet, because don't you ever just feel like a weird feeling and you don't know how to describe it and it's like something you've never felt before? Well, isn't VR the perfect way to kind of explore that? And people are like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I'm like, really?
Orange dishes.
So that's been pretty surprising also.
And we wanted to film this video on the reservation to the Red Star Range and to film the sites where a lot of these monsters were said to have been seen. And throughout the process, we ended up really discovering the meaning of what a monster is in our culture, which actually the word for the specific type of monster we were looking at in her tribe is also known as the little people or keepers of the land. And we started thinking about that relationship of like, who is the monster and who is a monster because they're protecting the land. And we asked people at the end of this installation, would you be a monster with us? And the work that I've been doing this year is within a research framework called antecedent technology. Right now, I'm working on a project called wampum.codes. It's a project with Mozilla Foundation, a fellowship with embedded at MIT's co-creation studio with Kat Sizek. And I've been working on the history of wampum and how that connects to software development and ethics and ethical dependencies in software development. And I'd like to read you a little statement that I wrote about that. If history was written by the victors, then the future will be written by the vectors. Artificial intelligence will radically change our world, our lives, our planet, and it remains to be seen if it will be a positive or a negative. If it's said that those who fail to study history are doomed to repeat it, I would add that those who ignore data have underfitted models. When Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were looking for a new model to serve as a basis for the United States government, they were very impressed by the Iroquois Confederacy. We call ourselves Haudenosaunee, people of the Longhouse. We're made up of the Seneca, Cayuga, Oneida, Onondaga, Mohawk, and Tuscarora. Thomas Jefferson spent over a year with us in upstate New York in one of our largest cities. When Jefferson and Franklin and the other founding fathers drafted the US Constitution, they cherry-picked the best parts that were most beneficial to their own political purposes, the bits that seemed to align the best with their Enlightenment era ideology, representation, voting, checks and balances, etc. But they left out the social and cultural networks that sustained these practices in the actual Iroquois Confederacy. Well, what did they leave out? In the Iroquois Constitution, women, clan mothers from each tribe were the only ones who could vote for the representative, who was always a man, a chief. Actually, the word for clan mother and chief is the same word. There was a balance of power. Only men could serve and only women could vote. Their economy was driven through complex agricultural arrangements. Everyone in the community participated in planting and harvesting. It was not an economy of slavery-dependent plantation agriculture. This is an example of colonial mindset. I see it, I like it, I want it, I'll take it. I take it and I take what will benefit my own paradigm, but I'm unconcerned with the effect it will have being taken out of context and the effect it'll have on the people I take it from. This is like trying to run a program without checking its dependencies. What if it turns out that the Confederate democracy or lasting peace and prosperity is dependent upon a balance of power along gender lines, or upon a different economic model than the one practiced by European settlers in North America? Or what if it imagines a system of agriculture where the environment is protected and maintains sustainable practices? We all have colonial mindset, just because our culture has colonial mindset. But here's the thing, we're not colonial subjects, and we don't have to live under a colonial empire anymore. In data science, we talk about models suffering from either overfitting or underfitting. Overfitting is when a model exhibits a low degree of bias, but a high degree of variance. In other words, it accepts a lot of differences within the data, but it doesn't have very much predictive power. Underfitting is the inverse of this, high bias, low variance. This is what happens when you make a generalization without enough data, or when the data is not diverse enough to represent the real world. The big problem with colonial mindset is one of underfitting, extracting idea without the context that made that idea work in the first place. I'm here to say, don't colonize our future. Our plans for the future need to include more data from diverse cultures and societies, and not only those ideas that flatter what we already think. For instance, let's say you want to lay the groundwork for a society run on the blockchain. What does that look like? How does that work? What are the consequences? If we don't have significant data, we might just have to wing it. But we actually have thousands of years of data about decentralized economies. The use of wampum among the Iroquois functioned as a decentralized, distributed ledger of contracts, and it helped us govern our society for centuries.
Wampum is an example of what I've termed antecedent technology, and there are many more cases like this. In South America, the Inca had a Turing-complete system of knot tying called quipu, which predated modern computing by hundreds of years. When we want to use powerful new technologies such as AI or blockchain, and we want as much data as we can to help us imagine positive change in the world, we do not need to throw out thousands of years of data that can fuel the next giant leaps our communities will make with technology. I want people to know that Indigenous people had technologies that have solved complex issues. I want us to use their data to help us dream our future, and I want us to believe that just because we have had 500 years of slavery, worker exploitation, poverty, and gender imbalance, we have had thousands of years of peace, prosperity, and equality right here in the country where I'm standing right now. There's a ton of Indigenous people working in AI and VR and cutting edge technologies. The internet has kind of a low barrier for entry, but also it's really where a lot of culture is happening right now. So I started just talking to my friends about the cool stuff they're making and also the cool stuff they're not making, because we're sheltering in place and having a lot of time to think about our process and our heritage and our cultures. And I'll let you guys hear a little bit of that. Hello, I'm Amelia Winger-Bearskin, the host of Wampum.Codes. We are brought to you with generous support from the Mozilla Foundation and the Co-Creation Studio at MIT. I interview Native and Indigenous artists, activists, technologists, entrepreneurs, inventors, and all-around cool people. And I'll let our first guest of our very first podcast introduce herself.
Great, yeah. Well, my name is Asha Veeraswamy. I am an Indigenous storyteller, creative director, and digital media producer that really focuses on AR, VR, and XR technologies and how we transition to those in the 21st century.
My name is Erica Tremblay, or Ondawayesta is my Cayuga name. And I'm super happy to be here and talk with you today.
I know. I have people always ask me, they're like, do you know any other Native American Jews? And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
There's a few. I think it's so funny. I get that all the time too. And I grew up with a few, so it didn't seem so weird. I went to preschool at my temple, and I feel like probably a third of my class was little brown Jewish kids.
That's amazing.
But I also grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, so
Yeah.
That's probably where you're going to find the majority of Native American Jews.
Wampum.Codes, the podcast, is the first iteration of a project that I'm outlining to develop a model of ethical software dependencies, an attempt to inscribe community values and developer accountability into code. The way it works is as follows. An example is in my package.json. I have Wampum.Codes dependency, which makes it clear that this project I have created is free to use and that people can only use it and modify it in any way they want. Besides closed sourcing, open sourcing already covers this use case. However, I have also encoded my own values. Wampum.Codes package.json dependency may look like this. And as you can see, it's formatted as a normal JSON file. I've borrowed a few terms from the domain of software development and repurposed them to help explain how an ethical dependency might be structured and what kinds of information it may contain. The following is a brief explanation of each term and how I use them. I'm going to be writing more about this week, and I encourage you to check out Mozilla's fellowship blog as well as the MIT co-creation blog for more information, or you can just go to my website, studioamelia.com, and I'll have the links there. I will have in there a sort of mini map game that I've created inspired by different types of design thinking maps and impact maps that I've created in the work that I've done with nonprofits. long tongue. He's just a puppy. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to talk to you and meet you sometime in person, maybe sometime at a dog park with my puppy Cowboy. But I hope you all are doing well and are safe and happy. So much love. Bye.
Wow. So much. That was incredible. Everybody, that's a big, so incredible. Amelia, do you have a cap off or wow?
Oh, yeah, I posted my link to everyone in the chat there. If I have just a link tree there of pretty much every link I mentioned in my talk. So I have kind of assembled it in an easy to find place for everyone should you want to read more or learn more. And looking forward to answering your questions. I can also bring my puppy Cowboy on. So let me know what you want. We're going to make cats happy.
You could do puppy and answer questions if you want. You all know the drill? Raise your hand, raise your Zoom hand or your physical hand or your or put in the chat questions that you have. Or you can unmute yourself if you just go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question. There's enough of you. I mean, there's not too.
Emily, this is George Greenwich. Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Hi, George. Yeah, I can hear you.
Just want to say you have the best virtual background ever.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to spice it up. We all get so bored of Zoom, you know. I thought, why not just make it go crazy? But I like to make images that are like my traditional beading. I learned how to do beading from my culture since I was little, and I used to do it on the plane all the time because I was traveling as an artist and giving talks everywhere, and it's just something really soothing. And then after 9/11, they were like, what is this porcupine quill and these scissors and these needles and all this stuff? And I couldn't bring any of my supplies on planes anymore. So I started doing all of these beadwork, but in 3D animation on my phone. And that's actually how I made all those backgrounds and imagery is I created them on my iPhone in the same style as if it's kind of like beading, you know, you're like looking like this, yep. But without any of the scissors.
And just really off topic, but can you talk about what's around your neck? It's gorgeous.
Oh, sure. This is actually Hawaiian, and it's mother of pearl, so it's like the shell of an abalone animal. And then I really liked this style too, so that's more indigenous Hawaiian. We don't have abalone. We have wampum, which I talked a little bit about, and usually I have my little wampum shell next to me, but now I don't know where I put it. So, but our wampum is purple and white, and we make a similar kind of necklaces out of it, but they're purple and white, and this is just a white abalone. Sometimes you see that nice purple color in abalone too, but this one's a white one.
Thank you.
So questions. If you all don't have questions, I'm so loved I loved the work, but the statement at the end is just so impactful to me. I can't even, just the wampum codes and the programmer as, you know, fiduciary, this whole idea where embedding a Declaration of Independence into your code is just so remarkable to me. And of course, I've heard about the Iroquois, but I've never really gone as deep as what you have just discussed. And this whole idea of how we navigate like society as platform and how we navigate this space is so complex. And you've given me a framework to look at it. And that is so unbelievably helpful. You know, I love the decentralized movement, and I've talked a lot about it with the blockchain stuff, but in the decentralized stories, but just that whole space is, I just would love to hear you riff on that for a little bit more while people, you know, get their courage up to ask more questions.
Yeah, well, you know, that was the first sort of article that I wrote in this series was for, you know, for the Making a New Reality book with Kamal Sinclair and with Co-Creation Studio. And that's sort of how my first project I did was the article that I wrote on decentralized storytelling. And I was looking at you know, all the different types of storytelling that have inspired me or that I participate in as an artist or as a, you know, as just a viewer and someone who appreciates them, that are similar to the way in which I learned about storytelling growing up. My mother's, as I said in my video, is a Seneca Cayuga storyteller, which is the role of a storyteller in our tribe is something between a politician, a teacher, a historian, and a performer. And, you know, in order to be given the stories, you have to have the trust of the community, you have to have the trust of the elders, and someone actually gives you the story and then you have the ability to tell it. You're not really supposed to tell it unless you've been given that by an elder who trusts you. And then the other side of that is once you're given it, you're not supposed to tell it the same way that they told it. You're supposed to make it your own, and you're supposed to make it your own for your own generation, for your own time period, and most importantly for the audience. So it will change based on what audience you're in front of. Obviously, if you're speaking to children, it'll be different. If you're speaking to a mixed crowd, it'll be different. If you're speaking to a non-native crowd, it'll be different. If you're speaking to, you know, if you're an ambassador from your tribe, you're going to tell that same story in a slightly different way, and it needs to reflect the audience. They are co-creating that story with you. You're a historian because oftentimes you may want to listen to many different elders about the way in which they told the story, but even more, the actual words that are in the stories, you may want to talk to a couple of different elders, or in the case of my tribe, we are a, you know, Six Nation confederacy. There are Iroquois all the way up in the northern parts of Canada, all the way out to Wisconsin, and all the way as south as even, you know, Tennessee. So it's a huge territory. So you may want to talk to people in other territories and say, you know, we have this word. I'm assuming that this word means you know, that, like, for instance, I was just explaining this to my animator who created all these really incredible images for my next article. And she was saying, oh, I read online in your creation story, of your Iroquois creation story, I read one place that the muskrat was the one that sort of saved the day and was able to plant the soil on top of Turtle's back. And then in another story, I read that it was beaver. And she's from Argentina, so she actually didn't know what either of those animals looked like. So I asked her to Google them, and she said, oh my God, they look the same. I said, I know. You know, can you imagine they're telling this word to somebody who speaks maybe English or Spanish, and they're saying this animal, and they're like, well, what does that animal look like? And they're like, well, it has these teeth, and so they're like, oh, beaver. Well, I don't know. Have you seen a muskrat? It looks exactly like a beaver with a different tail, right? So you're kind of are like, what happened to that translation? And so if you talk to different elders, they might say, actually, that's the word for muskrat. It was mistranslated, it was misunderstood. And it can actually go not towards just something as like basic as which animal, which is kind of important, right? Like which animal that you're talking about in this story, but there's also terms for like sacred herbs that the Sky Mother had when she fell down from the sky world and she landed on Turtle's back and planted them, and that created the vegetation of our world. That's part of our story about our creation myth. People say that the herbs that she held in her hand were sacred tobacco and other life-saving herbs, and you know, actually the medicine that is in there has been used for different ways in which women can help their cycles. And so that terminology was something that, again, when you had a lot of Western men that were translating these words, they didn't understand what that meant. So they're just like, I don't know, like voodoo, sacred things, something that doesn't make sense to us. So they just kind of say this thing, but actually had very specific things that it would do to help a woman's menstrual cycle. And it was something that they just didn't understand themselves how and why that would be fundamentally important to culture and society. So they just kind of glossed over that, right? And so I think it's very important as a historian who's telling stories, you need to do all those things. So my understanding of storytelling and a storyteller is that it's something between a politician, a historian, and a performer or an artist. And I looked at all the different ways in which we as a culture now in 2020 and in 2019 it's a little different. How did we tell stories? How do we consume stories? And I think it's really inspiring to me to see, my son is 18 and he is a game designer, and the way that he tells stories and creates stories, it's completely co-creative with a group of people, and they're building the stories, they're living it, and they're doing it in this long real time where you may have, a Dungeons and Dragons story that lasts 5 years, and each person, when you say, oh, well, tell me that story, it's like, Well, I mean, which part? That was a 5-year long story that happened for 4 hours every week for 5 years. That's a long story, right? Like, what part of that story? And so thinking about storytelling in a different way. And then you say, well, who wrote that story? It's like, was it the dungeon master? Well, he kind of set the stage, but really each person had their own character journey. They came together and created something different. And I think that's a lot more similar to the way in which I learned storytelling was growing up. And I like to kind of frame that with that article. And if you're interested in reading it, it's in that link that I gave you.
That's fascinating. I mean, I really love this, the way that you are merging very soft storytelling kind of concepts with this very hard, coding concepts and data concepts, because that is our world as our virtual and real world merged together. And it's really fascinating. And Chrissy has a comment next.
I thank you so much for your time today. It's not really a question as much, but as an older student who is new to the media entrepreneurship, I would want to really thank you for the approach that you gave to this topic. It's really showed me from a cultural perspective, the inclusive side, and just as Professor Strickler said, it's just softened it down. And it really spoke to me, I think mostly because I don't have as much technological background with coding and it's still very new to me, but just the philosophy of understanding with the culture and the storytelling and really honoring those and the understanding of the culture behind us and bringing it forward, I just think it's well, not necessarily unique, but how you present it is absolutely phenomenal and really just captures your attention, sucks you right in. And so thank you very much for that experience.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's very important if you're creating any kind of software that both people who are coding it and everyone who's designing it, right? Like the users, the designers, the whole entire team, the customers you may be building it for, the end users, however you want to think of that whole ecosystem. I think it's important that all of them should be able to articulate their values and encode them. And so that's why I wanted to make my process clear to all stakeholders, everyone who might be affected or care about this system.
I have a question. Not to cut in, I hope nobody was next. Um, with your storytelling, first off, thank you so much because I'm an older student as well, non-traditional, and this was really, really informative, but also you came at a totally different approach that I've seen thus far. But I really want to know for your storytelling, how do you select and what gets the green light or the blue light or whatever you want to call it to actually pull a story together? Because you just mentioned how long it takes to, as historians getting the information. So as you're compiling and doing all of that, which ones do you say, oh, this is worthy of putting forward first? How do you dictate that? And then what's your process in doing so?
I mean, one of my favorite quotes from a letter that Yoko Ono wrote to the Wesleyan people is she said, something gets it started. It's something like wish or hope. And I think that that's really how I get started is I have a wish or I have a hope or something either that isn't in the world that I wish it was or something I believe is in the world that I want to have a focus on. I'm somebody who I'm really invigorated by hope in the world, and I think that's my biggest type of fuel. And so when I'm trying to decide what type of thing, even if it's a very practical technological issue or a larger artistic project, I try to start with that. I try to start with something that I wish, something that I hope.
Thank you.
That's lovely. Definitely. I love the human-centered design thinking approach to storytelling. It's so hard to kind of come up with this concept of what is it that you want to bring to the world, but what is it that the world wants, and trying to kind of balance that is something that we spend a lot of time in my classes trying to kind of understand. And you've just been so eloquent. I'm definitely going to be reading some of your books. And now Liv has a question.
Hi, Liv.
Ashio, I am Cherokee Nation, so I'm very excited to see another Indigenous creator. And I also work in VR and various technologies. So this was hugely inspirational to me, but I wanted to ask you, with kind of decentralized and constantly changing storytelling in mind, what are some of your next projects? And is there any future project where you're considering procedural generation for storytelling? Like, I don't know if it is possible to have procedurally generated VR, but if that was a possibility, what would you do with it?
Yeah, I just put a link in the chat. Says iam4lab.org. I don't know if you're connected to them or not. It's a matriarch-led Indigenous VR lab, and it's for incredible women that are have been in the business even longer than I have and are leading an entire immersive reality led lab. And I would highly recommend connecting with them because I think they're really inspiring. It's always inspiring to be led by the matriarchs. So I love that. And when it comes to procedural generation, I'll connect you with my research that I've done in machine learning. So let's see here. I don't have this on the link that I gave formally, so I'm going to put this in the chat. This is separate. I founded a lab called the DBRS Innovation Lab, which worked with creative applications of machine learning technologies. And I had an artist that would create with us each month in different types of generated and procedural generated, whether it was music, images, interactive gaming, storytelling. And so that's some of the experiments that those people in my lab did. And I continue to co-create with human and non-human systems. And sometimes those non-human systems are what you would call and what you've defined as procedurally generated. Oh, what a beautiful cat you have. And then sometimes they're machine learning algorithms that work in a slightly different way. So I highly recommend people to experiment and play, especially when we were doing this lab. Oh man, we did not have machine learning algorithms in JavaScript. And now it's like pretty easy. You can do, you could just kind of upload training data sets and download your output and tweak some knobs. That's like, I really wish I had started with machine learning at that era rather than in like the 90s when it's really hard to do this stuff. So please take advantage of all the fun kind of software that you can do this work on now. And so I don't know, I'll let you guys play around with some of those things and read some of that research if you're interested. And thank you for that question, Lynn.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the comment on my cat. She just decided she had to be on my hands right now. But what though?
No, it's gonna.
Okay. Other questions? No other questions? Oh yeah, there you go, Jermaine.
Thank you so much for this presentation that you gave. It was really eye-opening to see like another culture, not of my own, like doing stuff in virtual reality, all of that good stuff. And I just like had a question about you working with virtual reality in, as a whole. I just took a class last spring, and it was virtual reality's production pipeline in the CMMI. And I just had a question about like I passed the class, but because of COVID, I wasn't able to finish my work. So how can I, what would you do now to practice in VR in my situation right now?
Totally. That's an excellent question. I'm actually mentoring 2 groups of VR fellows who are in the exact same boat as you. So I'll say what I say to them, which is 2 things. You can get really good at whatever game engine that you were working in. If it was Unity or if it was Unreal, you can do that. And honestly, I would say, God, like 90% of any of the VR projects that I've done are done in, the terminal with the screen and the keyboard and the mouse, right? Like it's a lot of that. And then every so often you're testing it out in the headset, but getting great at Unity, getting great at Unreal, or if you're doing A-frame or anything that is like web, I mean, look, there's so much to learn that you could learn it for 3 years and maybe you would be a guru then, but there's still more to learn. Like there's so much to learn. So if you dive into those amazing intro to Unity tutorials, those help whether they're VR based or not, because you're learning about colliders. You're learning about how do I do on click? How do I have the viewer looking at different things? I'm looking at terrain. I'm generating polygon optimization, right? Like all that stuff is valuable, whether it's in a game or whether it's in VR. And the nice thing for your life and for your career is is that also is very valuable, no matter if the VR technology changes or not, right? Like you've learned how to do really good interaction design, you have really good portfolio pieces. You know, the person who hires you in a job may or may not also have a headset or have access to a headset during COVID too, right? But they can, if you have really great screenshots, if you have a prototype, you can show them, if you have a nice video walkthrough of what happens, all that stuff is really, you can build your portfolio in a really strong way. Second tool I would say is any kind of mock-up or prototyping tool. I'm so sorry, in 10 minutes I do have to go because I have another meeting, but that's that sound. So you know, any kind of prototyping technology. One I recommend is After Effects, because that's what I used to teach when I was a professor, and I really like it. And the reason why I say a prototyping tool is you could be SketchUp, it could be one student in the Native American VR lab right now. He has a projector and he's been projecting different parts of his VR project on the walls in his house because he wasn't sure even what prototyping tool to use. I said, don't worry, you have a projector, let's just do that. Videotape that with your iPhone. Now, what does that look like to you? How is that interesting? Narrate that to me. That gives me more of an idea of where you are in your head than go learn After Effects. You know, I'm like, he's on a time constraint. He needs to pitch this in a week. And I'm like, let's not even try to learn another software. What does this feel like to your viewer? What is happening? What do you want them to experience? Mock that up with a bunch of projectors, mock it up with a bunch of screens, take a video of that, narrate that. This is when the user enters this room. This is when they meet my father and he tells them the story, right? All of that he can do without having a headset. And he's doing this all with a projector and an iPhone. And that is totally fine. It's about getting the idea through and then being able to talk about it and refine it. You need to get it to a space where at least you can give it to someone and say, can you give me something back from this, right? If you can't articulate yourself, then they also won't have a way of helping you get to the next level. And so I think those are the two things I would highly recommend. Whatever your engine is, get good at it, whether it's web or Unity or Unreal. And then whatever your prototyping thing is, get good at that. If it's Photoshop, After Effects, SketchUp, or just doing it in real life and taking photos of it, drawing it, storyboarding, all of those are totally valid, right?
Yes.
So that is some super great advice, everybody. I mean, I love that just you can always be envisioning your, you know, your vision, making your vision real without the massive plan and all the money and all the bells and whistles. You know, it's the iterative process. It's all definitely comes from that sort of, I love this. I can't wait to learn more about this ethical design thinking, because we all learn a lot about design thinking and iteration and, you know, showing before, you know, not keeping the secret in your head for years and years, because it's going to be great once it's, you know, you have to socialize the idea. And I just, it's so impressive to me to hear you talk about these processes that we all go through in whatever we make, but as a societal sort of, you know, doctrine. That is so, you know, or maybe not, I don't want to say doctrine because that's a little too strong of a word, but with super intentionality, you know, with really understanding what it is you're making and why it needs to be made, and, you know, being responsible for what you create. Like this I love this idea that the, you know, storyteller must be given the story. You know, you have to be responsible with that story. It's not just, you know, you're making something in the world. Pray, are you coming on to ask a question? No? Okay, I just saw you come on, so it's okay. That's all right. Any other comments or questions? I mean, I'm so inspired right now. Emmanuel, are you coming on to ask a question?
Hi. Yes, I was listening to everything and I was really agreeing with like the whole concept of like ethically planning out these different processes. Especially like as I've been getting more into storytelling, because at first like I got into the creative arts just like out of curiosity and experimentation. But as things have been getting like more and more in terms of infrastructure, and I've had more time to plan things out, and more people have been brought into the fold for collaboration, it's been really interesting trying to think like, why are we choosing this over this? Who do we bring on board? Who's not just in the content, but who's creating the content? And all of these different factors in terms of, you know, just building out these different stories. And it's especially like through quarantine, like prior to quarantine, I had done a lot of things like by myself. And I thought like as things started to shut down that it would be like even more isolating. But I kind of felt like connecting with my friends and trying to plan stuff from a distance made me like more communicative and more insightful on like the things that I was putting together. You know, a lot more phone calls and and meetings trying to figure out like how everyone can contribute to what's being put together. So I felt like the whole conversation was very insightful actually, and seeing how she implements that in virtual reality.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to share one last link. I love sharing links and everyone, but this is the Co-Creation Studio MIT, and it might be interesting for you, Manuel, to look at some of the other writers, especially who've been doing things around legal frameworks, even for telling stories, like people who are interested in going to maybe take a story that an indigenous tribe has and make a film out of it, but it doesn't belong to one person. It doesn't belong to, you know, and then how do you get consensus from the whole tribe of how to tell the story, how long to tell it? A standard IP agreement is like, oh, we take this story and no one gets to make anything about this for 10 years. But that's kind of ridiculous if it's like part of a culture, right? And so I think, you know, there's a lot of different people that have written this book for the Co-Creation Studio, myself included, and it is going to get published similarly to Making a Reality, where it's copy left and it's free and available online. But right now it's free and available online. So definitely check out that link. And there's other interesting people in that group that talk about the same ideas that you mentioned, Emmanuel, but from different perspectives than my own too. So that might be interesting for you.
I think that would be a great resource, because I tend to not even like to create about myself. I really get inspired by the people that I meet, and I want to like bring light to the things that they go through. So it was always like that apprehensiveness of how do I tell someone else's story in a way that is not just like deliberate, but also very, very insightful to their experience from the outside looking in. And doing that research has always been like the main part of that. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope reach out to them too and see if you'd like to maybe do some of the workshops. We have interactive workshops we do sometimes. So it might be something, if you have a story, bring it to one of the workshops and say like, hey, I want to have some feedback from a couple of people who are doing similar projects. There's an interesting project right now at the Co-Creation Studio it's a group of about 6 people who are doing diving to ships that carried enslaved people to the United States. And they're telling these stories in all these different directions. You have the people who are the divers and they're researchers at different universities. You have the people who are doing the like sort of archaeological, like molecular research on objects. So it's like, how do they tell that story? And that group is really insightful. I would definitely recommend like chatting with some of them, because I think they have a very complex story with lots of different scientific elements and really exciting. So yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Wow, Amelia. So, you know, the name of this lecture series is the Inclusive Media Futures. And you have given us a way to create the future of media with so many like ideas and roadmaps, ethically, societally, technically, and that this is just super impactful. I have recorded this. I'm going to have to go back and listen to that. When you read the paragraph, that was just amazing to me. So I want to respect your time. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And everybody, thanks for coming. This recording will be up, and we'll see you at the next time. But thanks again. Lots of love.
Everyone. Bye.
Really wonderful. See y'all.
Elizabeth, I had a question.
Okay.
But this is actually probably for like the other class though, because I missed.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So for the other class, is every class at 11, or does it like sometimes it's at 10?
Oh yeah. Okay. So that one we moved to 11, but I can do a survey and see if we could go back to 10.
Oh, okay. There was a survey that
I can do a survey.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Told me you have to leave it at what, 12 every day or 11 every day?
11.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was the reason why I could get to class, because I start the show.
Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right. Well, you know what? We'll I will do, for the first half of the semester, which we're almost at, we'll do 11, and then for the second half, I'll go to 10.
All right. Oh, okay. So like you upload like the recordings and everything, right? Yeah. Okay.
Well, yes, I do have the recordings, but again, the problem with the reason why I have people come to my classes, because we do those like exercises, so you can watch it, but it's kind of, people go off in breakout rooms and but you can watch it, and it is there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's just because it's like when I do this show, I'm using like a lot of like technology like around me and stuff like that. So I mean, I could try it on just pull it up on my phone.
No, that it doesn't. Don't worry. We'll switch it back to 10 midway through, which will be like the next meeting would be at 10, and it's not every week. It's only like every 2 or 3 weeks. So
Yeah. That's what I remembered. I was just wondering if it was like because it was like a particular